Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So we, as leaders in Rotary, are assisted in leadership by our shared vision. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. We are also connected in leadership by our common purpose to increase our impact locally and beyond, to expand our reach, to give others the gift of Rotary, to enhance participant engagement, to maintain enthusiasm of our fellow Rotarians for the volunteer work that we do, and to increase our ability to adapt, to keep ourselves responsive to the changes around us. I hope that you had fun in completing the leadership exercises. My apologies to you for missing a column on the answer sheet on page 28. And I did send you an email with that additions, but I can also put it into chat. Today, we're joined by our assistant governors as breakout room facilitators. So welcome to Al, Mike, Diane, Paul, Howard, Jeff, and Colin. Thanks again, team, for helping us out tonight. We're also joined by Hala Jawad as a facilitator. Hala is our District Global Scholarship Chair, and Myrna Ingalls is also joining us, who you know from her work with the district grant process for the last few years. Myrna is switching roles in 2024 in July, and we're looking forward to her supporting us as our district secretary. Mike Chafee, our district governor, is also with us today, and he is serving as our Zoom manager. Mike, any comments or instructions at this point?
I don't believe so. It's nice if you can share your camera so we can see your face, if that's possible. And if you're not speaking, if you just mute yourself, that would be also appreciated.
Great, thanks, Mike. I now have the pleasure of introducing you to Greg Schenkel. Although I understand many of you have met Greg before. Greg's a member of the District 6330 Passport Club, and he came recommended to me as the guy that should be leading this discussion about leadership. Greg's the company president of Unique Training and Development, and I will leave it to him to introduce his co-worker. Thank you. Forward to meeting.
All right, good to see everybody. Again, if you could mute, in fact, we can mute everybody now and then they can just unmute. Suzanne, we'll do that. So again, welcome everybody to our 2-hour leadership development adventure. So we're just going to mute everybody, and then so you'll have to unmute if you want to actually contribute. Now, so anyway, welcome everybody. I have met a number of you. I've spoken at district conferences. I went around and I was doing polling in different clubs and helping them kind of identify issues and opportunities.
I may have muted you, Greg.
Myself. Yeah, well, now I have to take a shot, but I'm not drinking. So at any rate, thank you for that. We're coming from our studios here in the Nondescript Industrial Plaza. There's Suzanne Jakes, our producer today. And this is where we do a lot of our leadership training for companies. We do them in French, English, and Spanish, and we do them right from here in London, Ontario. So now our specialty is working with supervisors, mostly in manufacturing, teaching them very basic fundamentals. So you're here today. Now I'm also a past president of the Rotary Club of London, where Howard Shears, I know, is joining us from. And I'm wearing my Paul Harris pin tonight. So I have served in the same role that many of you are doing. Some of you are doing it for the second time. And so our goal in the 2 hours is to really help increase your level of confidence. The good news, if you're doing the presidency for a second time, is that you have a chance to tweak a couple of things from your first go round, and you'll probably find it at least less stressful than perhaps the first time that you did it. So welcome to our session. It is a big group. We are recording the session. Again, we'll ask you when you do want to contribute, since it's hard for me to see who's speaking, if you do want to contribute on a given question or topic, you can raise your hand using the reaction buttons. And in fact, if you can find your reaction button, just give me a thumbs up, which is all you need to do now. The thumbs up only lasts for a couple of seconds there. You can pick it out of the reactions button. Ryan, good job. Judy, all right, good stuff. Now, so I know that we have a fair amount of content to cover in our 2 hours together. And the other thing I'll mention about Zoom is that Suzanne here is also going to occasionally spotlight me. Now, what that means, if you know Zoom in the top right corner of your screen, you can change your view. You can see gallery view, which is where you see, you know, everyone's picture in their little square, or you can go to speaker view. But when Suzanne spotlights me or spotlights you, it's going to go to speaker view again. Now, if you really need to see everybody and what they look like while they're watching and participating in the session, you can always switch back to gallery view again. But if you're on speaker view, you're of course going to see whoever's speaking. And when Suzanne spotlights me, that's going to be me. Now, if you get put on the screen with me, it's a little startling. So some people are like shocked when they see themselves consuming the whole screen. And if that's the case, you can always go back up to the top right corner and switch it back to gallery view. All right, you always have control of that. We're also going to be doing some polling. And so I actually want to well, I'm going to ask you in a minute about polling. I have some video clips that we'll use in our 2 hours together, very much like you've had in other sessions. We will be using breakout rooms. And so we'll also be monitoring the chat as well, if you need to use the chat to speak to Suzanne or myself. Now, let's go from this to Michael Scott. Now we have a license to use Hollywood clips in our training. And so this is a clip from season 1. And of course we have Steve Carell as Michael Scott. He's the district or branch manager at the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the thing about Michael is he really tries hard to be a great leader. And here's him telling you how awesome he is.
They go, God, we've never worked in a place like this before. You're hilarious. And you get the best out of us. I think that pretty much sums it up. I found it at Spencer Gifts.
So it's bad when you buy yourself the Best Boss mug. So of course I had my daughter make one. If you take the close up there, Suzanne, so, you know. That's, my team doesn't agree, but anyway, that's the mug. And we want you to be maybe not the best club president, but we certainly want you to be seen as effective from others. Now, here's the thing. Sonia gave you a definition of leadership, which I thought was a good way to start our session. But just so that you know, the leading experts around the world cannot agree on what a good leader is. So just in case you wanted some wiggle room as to what a good leader is, just know that all the leading PhDs at the Harvard Business School, London School of Economics, and others, the Ivey Business School here in London, Ontario, they can't agree what a good leader is. They have different hypotheses. They have different lists of competencies, and we're going to be talking about competencies here in a minute, but they don't agree on what a good leader is, because a good leader is often adaptable and agile, but different leaders can lead at different times. And what you think about them in one context might differ when you see them in another context, right? So that's leadership. Now we're going to use some polling in our session today. And so Suzanne's going to go ahead and paste into the chat the polling system that we're going to use. So we're not using Zoom polling. Now what that means for many of you, and by the way, if this technologically flummoxes you, just don't participate. It's totally okay. We'll have enough feedback from those who do. So you have two choices. If you have a smartphone, you got your iPhone or your Android phone with you, you can just open up a little browser window in there and you can go to this website. So the website is easy. It's called menti.com, menti with an I.com. And then we've given you a code. And so we're just going to be polling. I think we have maybe 6 or 9 polls during our session. We'll see if we even use them all. And so the very first Menti poll is this question of, are you a repeat club president? Now, I know you've had other training in Pella before. So, you know, this is probably a duplicate question that you've answered before, but I don't know the answer to the question. So have you served as club president prior to the 2023-24 Rotary year? And if you can't get on Menti, you can't open another window on your computer, you can't use your smartphone for whatever, you don't have a smartphone, you can always type in the chat, yes or no, have you served before? So right now, interestingly, and again, we have just the first few results coming through on the poll, which we will show you. Let's pull that poll up on screen, Suzanne, so you can see in real time. Fred, go ahead and unmute yourself while we're waiting for these poll responses to come in.
You took the code away too quickly. I didn't get a chance to.
Oh yeah, no problem. So what you'll notice is it is at the very top of your screen, and it's there. And it's also, of course, in the chat, which is now scrolled by because people have been answering the question. So Suzanne may go ahead and just copy it down and re-put it in the chat. And there we go. And it is right
Thank
at the
you.
very top of the screen as well. So what we've got is we have, an experienced group, maybe not quite 2/3, but a good segment of folks are serving as president. And so I know once you know about serving as president, it kind of makes it a little different, and you might just take it a slightly different way this year. All right, let's go here. And Sonia did, by the way, I have to give Sonia credit. Most people, when they ask me to speak, they say, okay, what do you got? Put your workbook together and send it out. Sonia actually did all the homework for me, which was awesome. So all I had to do was come up with the presentation. And the reason for that, of course, is that a lot of leadership content is not really that different from other leadership content. So thank you, Sonia, for that. So in the workbook, and you have this question on, or you have a series of questions in thinking about the leaders that you've worked with. Now, by the way, I might go a little bit out of sequence, but if you scroll up in your workbook, and I must admit the one that you sent me, Sonia, I don't have page numbers, but it says leadership exercise, okay, is the heading, and it's under personal leadership exercise. And what it asks you to do is to think of someone who you've met or work with, someone who inspired you or engaged you, someone who really helped you to reach your fullest potential. It doesn't have to be a Rotary leader, but that's certainly okay if it is. Could be a supervisor, a manager, a business owner, a teacher, a coach, someone who you really respected and has had a lasting impact on you. And what we're asking in this first question, and we will be using our breakout room, so I'm just giving Mike and Suzanne the heads up on that. All right, so I know you're working on that. And so the question, now we're not going to ask all the questions. This is the other thing I warned Sonia and Mike about, is we don't have time to answer every question in the workbook. So you'll have to give me some creative license to cover what I think is the key information. So from this, whether you reflected on this already, or you're just doing it right now for the first time, is think of this person who you've known, who you've respected, who's inspired you, made you feel good about serving with them. And we just are really pulling 3 questions to start with. What's one thing that you think contributed to making them successful or effective? So just one trait, one characteristic that you think really made or contributed to their effectiveness. And then I'm interested in having you share, and this will have to be quick because in your breakout rooms, you don't have a ton of time, although I'm going to try to give you enough time. How did you feel? How did that person make you feel because of the way that they were as a leader? Because we're going to talk today about emotional impact and emotional fingerprints that you leave behind in your interactions, right? People, again, don't know how much you know until they know how much you care, and they don't care what you know until they know that you care. So how did you feel about your result? And then we're just going to ask you to share those 2 quick things in your discussion group. Now, as was pointed out earlier, not everyone knows how to get the best performance out of the group. So you'll notice when we go ahead and open the groups that we've identified who's our facilitator, and Mike and Sonia tell me that they know who they are. So it shouldn't be a shock when they see their name as the person on the group. So they're really in charge of facilitating, and that's important, because otherwise the group will spend 2 minutes just talking to each other about, well, who wants to be in charge? And, oh, I haven't seen you in ages and so forth. So let's dispense with most of that. What I'd like the facilitator to do is to go around the group. And remember, we're just looking for 2 things. What's a trait that comes to mind when you think of someone you've really respected and admired? And then how did that person make you feel? And you might not have an answer to question number 2, right? Now, here's the other thing, is given that there are 5 or 6 people in each breakout group, you don't have a lot of time. So in this case, I'm going to suggest that you aim for about 60 seconds a person, because that should be enough time to say, hey, one person I was thinking of, they had this characteristic. And I just remember that they made me feel really just proud of, being able to serve and contribute with them. Or they really made me feel welcome, or whatever that emotion might be, right? Or they really knew how to celebrate and make you feel good, even if times were tough. So we're just looking at a quick share. Now, knowing that it'll take really more than 60 seconds each, we're going to pad that. So I'm going to give you actually a total of 10 minutes. So we're going to do 10 minutes, and we're going to put a timer on it. And Suzanne's setting that up now, Mike, just so you know.
Except we don't have Mike Hurry.
Yeah, we don't have Mike Hurry in group 1. So can I arbitrarily pick
We do
Adrian?
have Mike
Oh,
Hurry.
Oh, okay, there's Mike, but he's just
here, but
called
he's
Deb.
called something else.
Yeah, so, we'll-
Oh, perfect. He's,
I think
yeah, you're
Deb.
Deb. Thank you, Deb.
oh, great.
Mike, and you look great. And then you know what? We celebrate all people in transition. So congratulations. So yeah, we'll rename you, no problem. And so knowing that, then we're all set. So when you go to your room, when you go to your room, when you go to your room, we'll open up the rooms. We'll put a 10-minute timer. You'll see it counting down in the top right corner in your Zoom room. We ask that the facilitator just choose someone to start and then say, hey, who's the person you're thinking of? Now, no, sorry, we're not even asking you to name names. We just need you to say, what's one trait that you really think helped the best leader that you were thinking of? What's one trait and how did that person make you feel? And just go around the group. You have 10 minutes, which means you have an extra minute or two if you need it, but please keep your eye on the clock so that people get a chance to contribute. And as one of the group members, please refrain from using 4 or 5 minutes of the time to tell that great story you want to tell about your very first job and your great supervisor that you had. Let's keep it crisp, folks. All right, with that, my friends, before I send you off, do you have any questions that you want to ask? If you do, you can either raise your hand or unmute. We'll just take a shout out if you need to. Is everybody good? We're going to put you into these rooms. Not seeing anybody. All right, go and enjoy this discussion for 10 minutes. Now, remember the purpose. The purpose is to hear these different characteristics, to reflect on that for you personally, and also listen to how some of these leaders made other people feel, because I do think that that's something you want to be known for, is how you make others feel. So with that, my friends, we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right. Welcome back, everybody. You've got my audio on, right, Suzanne? All right, good stuff. Hey, welcome back. We're not going to do an extensive, well, we're not going to do any debrief actually of that discussion. My point was I just wanted you to hear what some of the folks in the session were talking about. Here's one thing to understand that I believe is true about leadership, or at least leadership development, is you can definitely do a lot of reading of books and attend seminars and classes like this one. But the other thing is you have to mine your own experiences, because you've had at least from your perspective, you've had good and effective leaders who you've worked for. You've probably had some that were less effective. I always think, bosses or managers are a bit like parents. If you've had great ones, you want to be just like them. And if you didn't have great ones, you want to be just the opposite of that. So you've had your own sort of encyclopedia of referencing. Probably the hardest thing to do, though, is to actually reflect on yourself. So this begs the question, and we're going to use a Menti poll. So again, what I'll do is I'll have Suzanne go ahead and open the poll. So in your opinion, are leaders born or are they made? So even when you think of some of the best managers you've worked for, some of the best club presidents, do you think that they popped out of the womb with the right DNA sequence and they had everything they needed to be an effective president or effective manager? Or do you think that they became that way over time? Now, we have 3 choices, as you'll see in the poll. One is if you mostly think that you have those characteristics right from birth. Second thing is you think most of it gets developed over time. And the third is that you think it's close to about a 50-50 mix. So right now, what it seems is that this group believes that most leaders are made over time, or at least it's a mix. So let me ask Mike Hurry, since we got you earlier, and I know you, Mike. Why do some people, whether you thought this or not, why do some people think that leaders are born, even if that's not what you thought? Why do you think many people do think that leaders are born that way? And you can unmute yourself. All right.
Okay,
Watching your,
yeah,
there we
so-
go. You got it. You got it. Why do
Because-
people think that leaders are born that way?
You know what? I just think some people seem so natural that they just
Yeah.
think that it must be something that they inherited or they were born with.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike. We'll take you out of the spotlight there. So, you know, what we see in people is we see something called charisma. We see certain characteristics. And I did have a director, a senior level executive in a fairly large company that's our client, and he admitted on a call that we had with a group of his peers. He said, you know, so many of my peers are gifted. They know how to speak in front of a crowd. They seem very confident. He says, I'm dealing with anxiety issues. I'm an introvert. He says, I really, to get to this director level, I had to work really hard at it. So some people might find it a little bit easier to do some of the things that leaders are asked to do, but most of the time they've just learned those skills over time. So my question to you, since most of you believe this at least to be either partially true or predominantly true, is in the chat, how do you think leaders do get better over time? How do they get made? So I've got the chat window open here, if you don't mind typing in. How do you think, I mean, even for yourself, how did you become better as a leader over time? So we'll just see what kind of comes in there. Thrust into greatness, that often is the deep end method. Sonia says practice. Jerry says self-awareness. Absolutely. Jerry, I wish that I could just have people realize that if they could just bottle up self-awareness and curiosity, they'd be mastering most of the leadership things that they're going to be asked to do. Modeling themselves, Sue says, over someone else, experience, of course, and your failures. I mean, you know all your failures. Other people only see a small fraction of what you screw up. But the fact is, if you can be sort of self-aware of the things that you handled maybe less well than you would have, and so there's a lot of that experimentation. I agree, Ken. I really would love people to realize that almost everything in the world, you know, subject to your beliefs, but a lot of it's made up. All the rules of Rotary have been made up, right? Somebody's decided that we do certain things in a certain way. And I also believe then that mostly if you view life as a giant experiment that's ongoing and you try to do different things and see how it works out. And if it doesn't work out, you either decide to keep at it and see if it works out differently, or you change your approach. So my friends, yes, this is true. Now, we have this great model in the workbook. And again, I'm covering things just every once in a while, be slightly out of sequence, but you do have this in your workbook, this model. And I didn't think Rotary could complicate things anymore, but this is a great model. First of all, I know, Peter, you're laughing at that. But, you know, the thing about models is it is a graphic representation. What's cool about this is it says there you are in the center. It's always your fault. Remember, that's accountability 101. But no, as the president, you have certain competencies, which is what we're going to focus on today, these 4 things. And then that drives these outcomes, you know, in your club. And then what that allows us to do at Rotary is to serve. Now, I'm going to save a lot of my editorial opinions, but my sense is that you could be very stressed out looking at all this and thinking, oh my gosh, I got to do everything here, and if I don't, I'm going to fail. In reality is that you can only do this. I think it is a volunteer position. Mike, did we decide to pay club presidents yet? No, that went to the helicopter for the district governor. I forgot. Okay, so basically, just kidding. There's no helicopter. Basically, you know, you are a volunteer, and so, you know, some of you are retired, but I hear retired people are still really busy. And the reality is you can't probably do all of it. So the key is to, of course, to be self-reflective, to prioritize. Many of you have been presidents before, so you know the things where you got traction, you know the things that you didn't spend as much time on that you wish you did. So you have a lot of learning from that perspective, okay? Now, what I did is I put this red circle because we're mostly going to be focused here. And of course, that's the Pella sort of goal. I noticed you had a new acronym, by the way. Congratulations in Rotary. And that's also worth some credits, coming up with new acronyms, because we don't have enough. Hey, you know what? I'm a bit of a smartass in the evening. Now, so this core is what you're focused on, which is you and the things that you should work on for yourself so that you can drive better outcomes and help the club be successful, but mostly so you can be of service to people. That's what Rotary is all about. Okay, so from that, we had Sonia had distributed this in advance, and we did ask you to do some of that work in advance. So we asked you to think about your personal competency assessment, which is in the book, right? And so again, I don't have the page number, but it does say personal competency assessment exercise. So we're hoping that you took the time to give yourself a rating. And even if you didn't, though, when you look at the 4 competencies, which again, I'll go back to these, right? So when you look at these 4 competencies, we'll put that full screen for a moment. So we've got, again, we've got relationship building and networking. We've got leadership. We've got planning and goal setting, and we've got personal development. So you've got a more detailed breakdown in your book, but if you took the time to do it, or if you're not, you're just going to, decide right now, which of these would be your strongest competency. So we're going to go to the Menti poll here. So if you've got the Menti working, and again, if Menti closed or you didn't do it earlier, but you want to, remember the website and the code is at the very top of the question. So we're going to pull that full screen for a moment. So which of the 4 would you say is your strongest? Now, while that's going on, I'm going to throw in little tidbits to fill the airtime because I hate silence, at least on Zoom. So here's the thing to realize, and many times in our leadership courses that we do for supervisors, is that people will complain about younger folks and, young people don't know how to work hard and all these things. And people love to kind of rag on the next generation. And just so you know, that's been going on since the 1800s. So people thought you were lazy at one point because you don't work as hard as your great-grandfather or your great-great-grandfather. And that's the trend. Every generation goes through it, right? So here's one thing, though, as the next generations are coming into being contributors, and that is that they don't like to be told that they suck at something. So they don't really want to be told you're awful at this, you won't amount to anything, this is something you should never try again. What people do respond to, and this is probably true of all ages, but especially true in the next generation, is you'd be even stronger when, you'd be even stronger if. Always phrase your feedback. If any of you are still, actively supervising or managing folks, frame your feedback from a strengthening point of view. You'd be even more effective when you do this. You'd be more effective if you did this. All right, so here, let's see the results of our poll, right? So which leadership competency is your strongest? Most people actually chose the relationship side, which is great, building good, strong relationships. And the second place was actually one that surprises me a little bit, the planning and goal setting. That shows some good structure if you're saying, yeah, you're actually pretty good at figuring out the planning and the goal setting. All right, and then leadership was 3rd and personal development was 4th on the list. Now, here's the next question, which is still a polling question. Which would you say needs the most strengthening? Where do you think the biggest opportunity is for you for further strengthening? And we'll, Suzanne, if you don't mind copying that code from earlier again and putting it back in the text or in the chat, we'll just grab that again. It always goes way high in the chat, but Suzanne will grab that and we'll repost it. All right, so we just posted the code back in the chat again. By the way, it's the same code throughout the session. So once you get it going, and as long as you don't exit, you'll be all set. All right, well, it looks actually, even though it was the second highest as a strength, it's definitely the highest one for further strengthening, right? So it's an area called the planning and goal setting, which, I would agree with this, keeping in mind that, again, it feels very, I don't know, it's methodical. And some of you will, of course, love that about planning and goal setting, but it probably isn't as organic as, shaking hands and meeting people and building networks and relationships. So that's good to know. And it's good to know for you to always be self-reflective of the things that you might want to focus a little bit of your attention on. Now, there is a whole concept that says that you should really go with your strengths more than you should worry about fixing your weaknesses. But as a leader, you also have to be aware of the areas that you need to get stronger at so that they don't sort of act as kryptonite and take away from your superpowers, which may be the things that make you successful. So I'm not here to debate whether you should fix your weaknesses or areas of strengthening or just ride your strengths. But you probably will find it easier to ride your strengths and just neutralize a few of the things that might work against you. All right, so that's, again, the 4 competencies. And I got a few thoughts on each one of these that you can, and by the way, again, the idea from our session is to see if you get 1 or 2 takeaways, things to think about. So I'm just going to add a little bit of commentary to this. And, when I think of leadership, one of the best lessons that I got in the last few years, because, I run a small business, but we've been growing. And the biggest thing was letting go of many of the things I used to always do for myself. In fact, this is one of the rare times that I'm actually on camera teaching these days. Maybe I do it once a month. So leadership tip number one is always think about who, not how. So a lot of leaders, and you've probably caught yourself doing that, you sit down, you think, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this done? But really, there's got to be a who out there. Now, some of you are going to say, I don't have any who's. And if you don't have any who's and you can't who it out, it shouldn't be done, right? Because otherwise you're going to just feel bad and feel guilty. And by the way, I really believe that Rotary should be a guilt-free zone. I know that, guilt is probably what drove many of you to say yes to being the president again, because nobody else stepped up. But my sense is that it should still be a guilt-free zone. It should be that you're doing it hopefully for the right reasons. And so if there's something and there's no who's to do it, you probably aren't going to do it. And you may as well realize that. But the other thing is, just because you don't like to do something, somebody else may have a tremendous gift, and that could be the who that you're looking for. And the other thing is to say to people, because I had this debate with another longtime Rotarian who served at very senior levels, and he says, well, what about when people offer suggestions, but nobody actually wants to step up and implement? And I go, well, you thank those people for their suggestions, but if there's no one who wants to commit to doing it, you can't just do it because somebody thought it was a brilliant idea, right? So who, not how. It'll serve you well as you go ahead. Personal development. Of course, self-awareness, which came up, of course, when I asked you what's one of the attributes and how you get better over time. Self-awareness. It's just to reflect, how is how I'm doing this affecting the outcomes that I want or don't want. And under relationships, which is admittedly one of your strongest ones for many of you, is just to think about human beings, despite us through artificial intelligence wanting to convert everyone into a robot. The reality is we're all emotional piles of goo, right? We are biological beings made up primarily of water and other fluids and tissues. But human beings, therefore, are emotional. Even those of you who are logical are emotional, right? So because of that, the question is, what is the emotional residue that you leave on people in your interactions with them? If in your interactions, you make them feel better about themselves or feel good about the interaction with you, you did an awesome job. Now, this is not a seminar on emotional intelligence, which you can certainly take a deep dive into that realm. But one of the things to realize is not only do you have to have control of your own emotional state, but you have to be aware of the emotional state of others and do the best to try to leave them in a place that they feel better about themselves, right? So again, not only should we be a guilt-free zone, we should be a shame-free zone as well. There just shouldn't be those negative emotions attached, because I really think that over time that builds up and then people don't want to be part of the organization. And that's true in workplaces. It's true in service clubs. And then the last part on planning and goal setting, which again, some of you said was one of your strengths, but it's also an area for development for most of you. I want you to think in terms of gains, not gaps. A lot of leaders see gaps, right? Here's where we are, here's where we'd like to be. And so the problem with gaps is they leave everyone feeling somewhat discouraged, right? Especially if the gap's wide. If instead you focused on gains, that is little tiny progress between these two posts, people will feel better about it, right? Think about this. You very seldom see a fundraising thermometer at 0 and say, yeah, we're trying to raise $3 million here. No, usually by the time the public sees it, it's already halfway up. Why? Because they've gone to the big donors, they've signed them up, they've got the big checks in. And what that does is it lets everyone else who has their $25 or $100 to contribute, it makes them feel like they can make a difference. But if all we did is say we're at 0 and we need $3 million, let's have your money. The people who want to pay 25 or $100 are going to say, what, I'm not going to make any impact. So they go to the big check writers and they ask them to give them $50,000 or $200,000. And when they get enough momentum, then they go to the smaller givers and they have the fundraising pyramid, right? So gains, not gaps. Show people the gains that they're making. Try to at least acknowledge them as they're going. In Rotary, at least from my experience, there are always going to be gaps, right? And the problem is gaps are discouraging. They're discouraging for you as the leader. That's why even in our own small company, we focus mostly on tracking people's accomplishments, not where they've screwed up, not where they fell short, but just highlight people's accomplishments. Why? Because it doesn't do any good to have people feeling bad about the contributions that they made, right? We want them to feel good. You need to create that. And I know probably some of you are like tasks, like we got to get some tasks done. Just remember, dealing with volunteers, human beings, they're emotional. Question is, are you making them feel better about their contributions? So gains, not gaps. All right. From there, let's go to this idea of leadership styles. This is going to consume most of our session today. It's the reason why I was recommended. By the way, one thing, Sonia, just so you know, when you say Greg was said he's the man for leadership, just know the key to success is low expectations. So if you just set the bar low, you can't help but be successful, right? All right. So leadership styles. Now, we're calling it leadership style, partly because Sonia put that in the workbook, but really, if you've had any other training on personality styles, this is really what we're talking about. We're talking about leadership styles, but they could also be personality styles, which means even if you're not a leader, you still will probably exhibit these traits. All of this goes back in the time machine to the very first model. That's why every course you go on personality styles, or to some degree leadership styles, it always has this graph, right? Now, here's the problem. We gave you a nice little self-assessment, by the way, of 18 questions. And if you did that, you're already got all the data you're going to need in this session. But let me tell you that even if you didn't do that homework, that you're going to be able to figure it out right now. And most importantly, since you can't go to every member in your club and say, could you please fill out this 18-question survey so I know how to treat you? We got to find a quicker way of making an observation and then making an adjustment in our approach based on what we see. Now, many of you know the golden rule, right? The golden rule in business is he who has the, or she who has the gold makes the rules. Oh, no, sorry, that's not the right golden rule. The golden rule is to treat people as they, the golden rule is to treat people like you'd want to be treated, right? That's what most of us live by. You know, I want to be treated a certain way. I'm going to try to treat other people that way. Well, here's the problem with the golden rule. It presupposes that other people want the same things as you, right? So some people have proposed that there should be a platinum rule, and the platinum rule should be to treat other people as they want and need to be treated. So when we talk about these leadership styles, I just want you to think about the other people you interact with. My guess is there's just a lot of people that you naturally get along well with. And then there's that one club member or that one member of your board where you just dread seeing them because you just know they're going to push your buttons or cause your life to be more miserable. Well, I'm hoping to give you a few tips on how to do that better. So as you think about this, not only do you think about where you are on this, I want you to think about some of your club members, right? And knowing some of the unique personalities that you deal with. And I know that from my own experience, although I will say I had a pretty good, I would say there weren't really that many difficult negative members in the club, even Howard, the club, when I was there, when we had a lot of, had a pretty sizable membership. The reality is that most, I think, wanted to do the right thing and were quite respectful. But every once in a while, you get one person that just gets under your skin. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I want you to think about this as two dimensions, right? All the personality programs basically use the same two dimensions. You'll notice that the vertical axis, I believe that's called the x-axis. Oh, no, that's the y-axis. Y-axis is the vertical one. All right. Now, the vertical axis basically is judging how open or reserved the relationship is. It's the very first and easiest thing you can use to size up someone. Do they give you that warmth? I mean, you know people where in the grocery line, they're starting a conversation. In the elevator, they're starting a conversation. You're in the doctor's office in the waiting room and they're talking to you. Well, hey, I'm not a doctor, but I'll have a look. You know, these are the people that will talk to anybody and start a conversation, even when nobody else really wants to talk, right? So I'm kind of that person. My family probably finds it disturbing, but I'm not an extreme. I have my best buddy, my best man at my wedding, still friends to this day. And I know he knows someone. We're at a London Knights game here on St. Patrick's Day, and he knew somebody sitting a few rows behind. He knew somebody else. He just knows somebody. He knows somebody in every town that we go to, right? So how are you on, if you didn't even fill in the survey, are you generally outgoing and extroverted? Or you tend to be more reserved and let the other person start the conversation? Now, just so you know, not quite, 100% on the statistics, but generally, there's more introverts than extroverts, right? So there's more people who are reserved than outgoing. So if you're more reserved, you're in good company. Almost 2/3 of the population are more introverted, and maybe a third, slightly more than a third, are actually extroverted. Okay, so that's one thing you can size up. Just how quickly does someone get warm? Introverts are still warm. They just like to be warmed up a little bit first. Now, so you can judge and judge, I mean evaluate, I guess. You can observe whether someone is outgoing or whether they tend to be more reserved. It's the easiest thing to observe. The other dimension is slow pace or fast pace. You'll also notice it says direct and indirect. So here's how you tell, and you can even size up yourself, right? And your family members, and even some of those club members that you know. It's like direct is you ask somebody's opinion, they go, I'll tell you right now, this is what I think. They're not shy about making their opinion known. Even when it's not asked for, they let you know. They're direct, all right? You ask them a question, they give you an answer, right? They don't beat around the bush. They don't sort of go, well, you know, it might be this or it might be that. They just tell it like it is. That's direct, all right? Now, they also tend to be fast-paced. My wife and I have this conflict. I'm more of a destination. How do we get to the destination? She's more like, let's smell the roses and enjoy the journey, right? If you're a journey person, you're probably on the other side of this line. So indirect are people when you ask their opinion, or my wife, Robin, and I, we have these interactions where she's definitely more indirect than me. So, you know, did you want me to come and help you? Did you want me to do this? Well, I don't know. I'm probably okay. And it's like, just tell me, right? Or my favorite is, what did I do wrong? And I just keep asking until I eventually find out. So indirect, when you ask them their opinion, they'll go, well, I don't know. There's a lot to consider. All right. So they're considering it, right? And they're also a little bit slow paced because they don't want to make a mistake or offend anyone. They tend to be more on the slow pace side. Okay, so these are the two dimensions. You'll definitely see the extrovert introvert more easily because the extrovert's going to come and start a conversation with you. An introvert is going to be someone who's warm but takes a little warming up. And then the other thing you'll get to know people as you interact with them. Do they tend to just be opinionated and more direct on one side, or do they tend to like be a little bit less likely to tell you what their real thoughts are? Right? Okay, so with that, here are the 4 styles. And by the way, you do have these 4 styles, nice in color, at least in the document that I have. So you've got your socializers. Now your socializers, definitely at a party, they're circulating. Everybody knows who they are. You have friends like that. Some of you are probably like that. You know, it's been said that socializers, the ideas are like gumballs. They just roll on out. And if you didn't like that one, I got another one for you. So socializers have tons of ideas. They're great for coming up with cool and unique ideas. They often don't stop to think whether they're realistic or not. But these are the folks who say, well, we could do this and we could do that. You know, I think if we bought every new member a new Mercedes, we'd have lots of members. And they're probably right. But that's an idea that might not be feasible for most clubs. All right, so that's the socializer. Tremendous. Put them in charge of party planning. If you put someone like me, who's a director in charge of party planning, that means a loaf of bread and some water. You know why? Because that's nourishment. That's all we need. Let's check the box and move on, my friends. All right, so director personalities, again, direct, fast-paced, a little bit more introverted, don't always explain themselves really well. They like to make decisions. When I coach some nurses on how to deal with doctors who tend to maybe want to be more director oriented, I'd say never tell them what to do, just always offer them 2 choices. So if you have some people who like to be in charge, but they don't have any real power, always just offer them a couple of choices. That way they can choose one of those options and feel like they were in charge. But who is really in charge? The person who put the 2 choices in front of them. All right, that's the director personality. Then you've got your thinkers. Now, thinkers are in short supply. Roughly only 10 to 12% of the population are analytical thinkers, right? Thank goodness they are. I had a meeting this afternoon with one of our contractors, and she went through the agreement that we prepared and went item by item. Now, she's an engineer. She's very detail oriented. So some things I hadn't even thought about, she was bringing up and asking questions about. It's the thinkers who read the Facebook terms and conditions and let the rest of us know that we're getting screwed on our privacy rights. So thinkers are great. If you're a thinker, it means if I said you're going to go buy a car, you're going to have a spreadsheet and a matrix of all the car models, all the features, the price points, the margins, and you're going to take your time, because if you're a thinker, the worst thing that can happen is you could make a mistake because you overlooked something. So if you've got analytical folks, they're going to want to dot the I's and cross the T's, but thank goodness that there are some people like that. You might be like that. And then finally, we have what's called the realtor. Now that's a realtor sells real estate. A relator is a different person. The relator is this one. Now, by the way, God bless us, the relator is about 50% of our population. These are the folks who just want everybody to get along. They're so nice. right? And they have really warm relationships. When you spend time with a relator, you just feel good. You feel good about yourself. You feel good about them. Even when they disagree with you, though, they won't tell you. They'll just spare you. They might talk about you behind your back, but they will not come out and tell you that they disagree with you. So the world is full of relators. The good news is they're seldom the problem, folks, because even when they're ticked off, they tend to take any of the negative feelings that they might have and put them into a sack that they may carry around until one issue finally causes them to snap and the reaction sort of is explosive. But thank goodness that many people, they just want to get along. And if they have beefs, they often don't tell you what they are. Now, again, if you're a relator, my suggestion is if you do have a concern, be assertive, express it, but don't wait till you get really upset because then it kind of freaks everybody out. So, relator, right? Perfect, great relationships, big chunk of the population. Socializer, maybe 20 to 25% of the population are that salesy, outgoing personality type. Directors, relatively small number of people, like control, like to make decisions. Thinkers, so that's again, probably 12 or 13%. Thinkers around 12 or 13% of the population. So most of the people in your club are probably going to be relators, but to the extent that they've been in senior level positions, you may find yourself with a bunch of directors, right? Which is people who want to be in charge making decisions. And that's not bad if they are in charge making decisions. It can be a little disruptive sometimes when they like to tell other people what to do, but really they aren't in charge and they try to impose their ideas on the group. Okay, that's a quick run through of the four. You have a lot more detail in your workbook. So here's my question to you is, if you did the assessment, you know this. If you didn't do the assessment, and by the way, I made it sound like there's some that are better than others. Every one of these has pros and cons, right? And by the way, you're not just one. Like I'm a director socializer, so in certain settings, I'm a wild man. Glenda knows that probably. So director socializer, which means mostly I'm a director. Push comes to shove, I'm under stress. I'm trying to figure out how to solve the problem, how to get that box checked. And because of that, I may leave a lot of unfinished business behind while I'm trying to check that box, right? I don't want to hear it can't be done. I don't want to hear it isn't done. I just want it to be done, right? So you're a mix of these. You probably have a major and a minor. Okay, so with that, let's just ask this polling question using Menti. And again, although it is right there in the chat window if you need it, is what was the leadership style do you think you exhibit the most, either according to your assessment or according to my very quick run through? All right, the polls are coming in. Let's put those up if we don't have them up there already. Do we, Suzanne? You got it up? All right. So, we got a lot of directors. All right. And you got, some did say that they're a tie. A good group of folks are a tie. All right. You got, so a little bit more on the, more directors. Right. So my goal is to make sure we're done on time. Directors appreciate that. Many directors wonder why it's taking us 2 hours. Couldn't we do this thing in 30 minutes? I'm with you, my friends. You're very time sensitive if you're a director. John, you want to unmute and talk to us? I see your hand is raised. You can unmute.
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to take part in the polls.
Oh, that's okay. So yeah, we're not using the Zoom polls, so we'll take your hand down.
Okay.
And that's okay if you aren't, but I do see some people have typed it into the chat as well. And we're going to put that again, that little website that we're using to do the polls there and the code that you need. So interesting, this group, probably like many, is thinkers. And if you are a thinker, you know how rare you are because nobody else thinks like you think. And even when you say, oh, why don't people just sit down and think and work it out? People don't. They count on you to do that. So if you're frustrated that everyone else makes stupid decisions based on emotion, you're right. Okay, so directors like to be in charge. So here's the big question, though, when you think about this. I'm going to go through them again really quickly, but I want you to be thinking of some of the people you interact with your club. Obviously, you can think about the people that you get along well with, famously, and then you should think about the pains in the butt, the people that drive you a little bit crazy and maybe even wonder whether you want to be the president some days. But so just, you can think of the people that you have struggles getting along well with. You can think of the people that you get along famously with. And I'm even going to have some good relationship advice here in just a moment, which again, my wife would probably laugh if she heard that I'm dispensing relationship advice. Okay, so let's go to talking about each one just quickly. I've got a quick video clip, Suzanne, just to warn you on that. When we're talking about directors, it's all about being in charge. So if you have a director who has no real power, they will still want to tell you what to do. And so remember, always offer them two choices so that they feel like they're in charge. And so for a movie clip, I chose A Few Good Men.
Colonel Jessup, did you order the code red? You don't have to answer that question. I'll answer the question. You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, well, that could be a little tough in a board meeting, but anyway, apparently Jack Nicholson had to do that about 32 times to get the right tone that he was looking for. So good acting performance there. Then we get the socializers. Now, remember, these are the partiers. These are the folks who like, life is good. Dude, just chill. Everything's going to be fine. And I chose this clip from Dude, Where's My Car?
Dude, you got a tattoo. So what are you doing? Oh, dude, what does my tattoo say? What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet. You idiot.
All right, so again, that's a little exaggeration as I'm doing each of these. Then there's your thinker. Now, I had to go old school on this one, and in this crowd, I know there's some of you who, like me, used to watch the original Star Trek, and so I got to go to the OG thinker from television, and that would be Spock. And so just notice Dr. McCoy here giving a little teasing, because Dr. McCoy is actually a socializer personality, even though he's a physician, he's a jokester. So watch he and Spock interact in this scene from Star Trek IV, The Journey Home.
You present the appearance of a man with a problem.
Your perception is correct, Doctor. In order to return us to the exact moment we left the 23rd century, I have used our journey back through time as a referent, calculating the coefficient of elapsed time in relation to the acceleration curve.
Naturally. So what's your problem?
Acceleration is no longer a constant.
Well, then you're just going to have to take your best shot.
Best shot.
Yes, Spock. Your best guess.
Guessing is not in my nature, Doctor.
Nobody's perfect.
What I love there is the doc knows exactly what buttons to push, because if you're a thinker, you don't even think about the fact that you may have made a mistake on something or forgot to consider something. But again, isn't it good to have people who do think things through? And then finally, we have our relators. Now, this is just the sweetness of honey and life. And for this one, I chose a very sweet moment. And do not be insulted that this came from this particular movie. Focus on the line. So you're saying I got a chance.
What do you think the chances are of a guy like you and a girl like me ending up together?
Well, Lloyd, that's difficult to say. We really don't.
Hit me with it. Just give it to me straight. I came a long way just to see you, Mary. Just least you can do is level with me. What are my chances?
Not good.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
Well, that's seeing the positive side of everything. And it's good that we have a lot of relators. Todd, I loved your thumbs up there. So you've obviously seen that movie. It is Dumb and Dumber, but that's not to say the relators are dumb by any means. It is good that we have these folks who are so intent on good relationships. And I'm so thankful that my wife is a thinker relator, because it really helps balance me out on the director socializer. Okay, so which of the 4 styles, this is back to Menti again, so we'll Again, it's in the chat if you missed it. It's of course still on the top of the screen as we go full screen on this, is which leadership style is most challenging for you? When you think of, again, that maybe that club member, that friend of yours, that person that you really had trouble dealing with, what is the style that's very challenging? All right, so you can see the results. Actually, half of people are reporting that the person that annoys them the most is the director. Well, I agree. Even directors find directors to be annoying. Because again, it's as long as it's clear who the top dog is, directors are actually fine working together. But if there's any ambiguity, they will fight each other for power and authority. All right, so let's just take, so, you know, we've got it up there. What I would say is that directors annoy most people because it seems, first of all, that they don't listen, which is somewhat true, and that they're impatient about getting things done. And so therefore they can be quite annoying to different folks. But you can see that some people would find a socializer annoying, maybe because they're tired of watching them go around with a lampshade on their head. And sometimes even thinkers can be annoying because they do want to take a long time to make sure they get the best possible answer. And yeah, even the relators probably a little bit sometimes, even though they're probably pretty hard to certainly to dislike, but relators might be overly sensitive to how other people are thinking or feeling. Yes. So Jerry, thank you. Directors can be a pain, but if they are doers, they are a blessing. You're right. And as long as you can create, I once dealt with this senior executive in this one large packaging company, and he's a director, and I know his wife is a director. And I say, how do you guys avoid sort of conflicts? And he says, she has her turf, I have mine. And we know not to step over the fence to the other person's turf. And as long as we do that, we're good. All right. So again, ideally, if you have directors, you're right, they do like to check the box. They do like to get things done. They also like to tell people what to do. And again, may not always be the most patient person. Now, again, all of us are a composition of these different styles. Okay, now, I'm going to just give you a little snippet of relationship advice. This doesn't have as much to do with Rotary, but can help you in your personal relationships with your significant other. All right, so first of all, and we're going to ask you this in a polling question in a moment, but remember that other personality styles can attract you. Sometimes that, you know, you complete me moment where this person's quite different from me, but they kind of fill in my blanks. All other personality styles can also annoy you, right? So there's something in relationship science called the attraction annoyance ratio. So if you're attracted by the other person's differences because they fill in some gaps for you, then you're good. If the attraction is more than 1.33 times the annoyance factor, all thumbs up for your relationship. And if the annoyance ratio is inverts, some of you know what the inverted yield curve is in investing. Well, when you have the inverted annoyance attraction ratio and they annoy you more than they attract you, probably things aren't looking really good for the next time ahead. Now, I'm mostly making this up, of course, but let me just ask you this polling question is, when you think of this, your significant other, or your most recent significant other, would you say that they're the same or different from you? Primarily the same or different from you? All right, because we do have, of course, opposites attract, but we also have birds of a feather flock together. Right, so we do have around almost like a 70-30 split here. Yeah. Now, for those who've been married more than once, can you tell us about your first significant other? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, right? Okay, I know, Mike, you laughed at that. So the reality is, just if you think about personality styles, if there's a lot of relators out there, you're going to have a lot of relators married to relators and sharing things that are in common. I did this mostly for fun, but I just want you to be thinking about the personality styles of other people in your life. I think the reason, by the way, I was probably recommended is Sonia. I remember Diane Chandler, former district governor. She really found a hoot in her husband, Bill, found it funny when I talked about these personality things. All right, so leadership styles, we have the 4 of them there. Now, let me ask this. Diane Ives, are you able to unmute for a moment? Don't cringe.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Don't cringe. I say the facial expressions. If you had, if you were trying to solve a problem and you only had relators on your team, what's the potential downside? So they all, very easy to get along well with, all want to be friendly to one another. And if I had that group together to solve a problem, what's the potential downside of having so many nice people around the table at once? What do you think?
Maybe they can't come up with a clear, definitive solution because nobody wants to hurt anyone's feelings.
You nailed it, Diane. You see that? You turned that frown upside down, you just crushed it. So, well, way to go. That's exactly right. Is that relators might disagree with each other, but there's a tendency to try to build everyone's solutions or everyone's discussion into the answer, even if it might not be good. And if you had reservations, a relator might not point out what their concerns are, right? Now, what if you, let's go to Ken. Ken Bowden, you were a Global Passport. Ken, you can unmute. You were already thoughtful in some of your answers, even before we started the session. If you only had thinkers solving a problem, well, first of all, that's pretty good. They're pretty good at thinking things through. What's the possible downside?
The possible downside, if everyone is thinking, we may not get action.
Right. The expression would be they can't see the forest from the trees. They're definitely good at going deep, right? But they may not always think bigger picture. And some things like, again, it just depends on your preferences and to some degree what your profession was probably and maybe other factors, is that there's people who think as long as it's 80% right, let's go ahead, let's get it done, let's get it into action. Other people are like, no, we need to make sure this is 100%. All right, so thank you, Ken. Socializers, Glenda, since we have a pre-existing relationship, if you just had socializers in a problem-solving session, what's the possible downside?
They would just have so much fun while they were talking about it, but probably little action out of it.
They might not have as much to show for it. They might go, oh my gosh, our time is actually up.
Yeah.
And they'd have lots of great ideas. So they're definitely forest folks. Look at this forest and this forest and this forest, but they might never get to implementation. So you got it.
Right.
Okay, so we've had a great run so far. Howard Shears, where's Howard Shears? Can you unmute? We got to flip through the pages here. All right, so Howard, if we only had this director driver type personality in a meeting, I mean, probably be a short meeting, but what's the possible downside of all these directors being together, all these people who like to be in charge?
Too many cooks and the pot would be boiling.
Yes, you got it. So it's really tough because directors are like, well, somebody should take care of this. And like, they want somebody else to take care of it. They want to tell other people what to do, but they don't necessarily want to do it themselves. And by the way, again, if there's a clear pecking order, directors will behave themselves. But if it's a free-for-all, then it's like, who is going to exhibit the most power? And again, I'm going with the extremes here. Many of you might be directors, but you probably have a softer side as well. I actually score 100 on driving personalities. So yeah, there's not many people that are more of a director than me. I just have that sort of socializer to balance me out. So remember that if you're putting together a group, even though we tend to want to deal with people who are like us, when I think of diversity, beyond just racial diversity and all the other preferences that people have, what I want to have you think about is it's great to put together a team of different personality styles so that you can get the benefits of all of them. And they will tend to counterbalance each other out. So you put too many people who are like, they'll get along famously, but they may or may not really have gone through and make as good a decision. And of course, the more people feel involved that it was their idea, the more they're committed to implementing. All right, cool, very good. All right, so again, let's take a look. There's great notes in the workbook that I don't have time to go through all of them with you, just how to adapt. In other words, to be better. Now, the styles on your board, okay, this one, I think, just looking, we got another 44 minutes left on the clock, is, I'd like, actually, this is weird on a Zoom call. I'd like to just give you a minute, if you haven't already done this reflection, as you reflect on some of the members of your club that you find easiest and most challenging to interact with. What are their styles? Nobody sees your workbook but you, remember, so you can put your little initials if you need to. You can, and then knowing what you know, so I'm just going to give you a few minutes. Knowing what we just covered, what would you do differently to perhaps help with that personality style? All right, so we're just going to give you a couple minutes to reflect. I'm going to stay here on screen. If you want to raise your hand or ask a question, you can. We'll just give you a few minutes to reflect on that. What's one person on your board? Only you need to know who they are. And what's their style and how might you adjust? Guys, I'll give you 60 more seconds, 60 seconds. But I said, you can do more than one. You're not limited. I always say when I give you instructions, it's just sort of like, what's the bare minimum, right? You can always plot your entire board on this thing if you wanted to. And Jerry, thank you for the great patent quote. So we can always substitute the word person in there. That seems to be universal. But I do like the idea of like, here's where we need to go. And it's when you tell people what to do that they probably don't like it. Then it comes off as micromanagement. So as long as you say, hey, here's where I think we need to be. And then even if it takes a couple of discussions, feel free to start thinking it through and then get back together and ask them what their thinking is. So using that, I'm going to actually go through a couple of thoughts on teamwork. And I know you've got some good resources in the workbook on teamwork. But there's a project that Google did, the search engine, right? Because you can imagine these large tech companies, they want to know, why do some of the project teams outperform and some teams seem to underperform? And so they did a study. It's called Project Aristotle. In case you're curious, if you don't, well, that's asking Suzanne to type Aristotle. That's a spelling question. Yeah, she was a little bit cringy on that one. But Project Aristotle is a great article in the New York Times that Charles Duhigg actually wrote up. And Charles Duhigg, one of his books is really quite famous as well, called The Power of Habit. Anyway, in the study, Project Aristotle, what Google found is when you sorted through all the possibilities of why a team might outperform others in terms of achieving milestones and being successful, they found it wasn't the ones who socialized a lot. It wasn't the ones who had all stars. It wasn't the ones like had, only the seasoned veterans or only the newbies. It was actually two things that had nothing to do with any of that. It really was psychological safety. And the one I didn't include here is strong group norms, So group norms, since I didn't put it on my slide, group norms is really the informal sort of rules that everyone agrees to kind of govern themselves by. So, some boards will have a code of conduct, but even if all you say is, hey, let's just agree on how we're going to interact with each other here. Group norms, if you have a strong set of group norms, which is informal rules, or they can be formal, then even disruptive people will find that they will actually meld with the group if the group has strong norms. If the group does not have well-defined norms, though, disruptive people really knock it around quite a bit. Now, psychological safety, which is the one I did want to talk about the most, is they said that if the group sort of cared about each other, noticed each other's emotional state, asked about it. Hey, you just don't seem to be yourself. You seem frustrated today. And they showed that they actually cared about people. They also defined psychological safety as the feeling that you can be yourself and also speak your mind without necessarily thinking that you're not allowed to do that, right? So the groups who had strong psychological safety and good group norms tended to perform best. Now, there's a few fallout things that come from that. One is leaders speak last. Now, this is difficult, especially if you're a director. I know I like to speak quickly and first, but here's what happens. When you as a leader says, I think we should do this, what does everyone else think? Now, in a Rotary Club who has also very strong people, they probably will still speak their mind if they disagree. But when the leader speaks first, everyone else just says, well, I guess that's what we're doing. So better as a leader to ask good questions, find out what the thinking is, and then you can always sort of draw the consensus before you necessarily articulate your own perspective. So leaders speak last. In any problem solving, it's better to actually ask questions and listen to people. Now, I've got a couple other thoughts on that. The best solution for a Rotary Club or a business or a team that's trying to solve a problem is to get both high quality ideas, but that they're also well accepted. If we have a great idea, but we don't accept it, we don't get the benefit of it, right? On the other hand, if we get a bad idea, but everyone thinks it's the right thing to do, we're going to not get the results that we're looking for. So really, our job as leaders is to facilitate this conversation to see if we can get the highest quality ideas along with the ones that everyone can agree are a priority, right? Because then we're going to have commitment to move it forward. Now, what that means for you as a leader, especially in a board meeting, is to encourage participation, because the relator personalities are going to generally wait for the other socializers and directors to speak their mind. And they're going to sit there and you're going to think that they have no good ideas. That's not true. They just do not like to interrupt. They consider it to be disrespectful. And they often will even question whether what they're about to contribute is of high enough value, because they don't want people to think less of them, right? If you're a thinker, you also tend to take in a lot of information to process it. And so you might not always speak your mind as well. So what ends up happening is groups deviate to the loudest and most frequent contributors, right? And that is not always great because we need a lot of folks to be bought in. So avoid domination, encourage participation. So the best leader knows that you can't, I was on the radio in Windsor for a while as the leadership wizard. I coined myself the leadership wizard, which does not make you a leadership wizard. But it turns out what they really wanted you to do is to say it like you absolutely certain. And the reason for that is, especially the media, and you got to watch out. I tell my parents
To
this
get
'cause they
your
watch a
daughter
lot
to
of
make a
TV.
mug with that on.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. She has the mud making machine. So, but what it said is that they want you to be certain, because the average person cannot tell the difference between an opinion stated confidently and a fact. Most people cannot tell the difference between an opinion stated confidently and a fact. So I'm telling you right now, you got to watch that. If you let those people run the day, a lot of people go, it sounds pretty certain, right? I've seen former, not Navy SEALs, that would be an exaggeration, but I've seen former Marines in some survival simulations, and they just direct the team. Everyone goes, well, you're the former Marine, I guess we'll just listen to you. And they do exactly the wrong thing. So part of your job as a leader is to give some volume to the quiet voices and to tamper down some of the most assertive voices. Not because you're trying to either promote or punish. What you're trying to do is to get the ideas out for careful consideration. And sometimes an idea will be presented, and depending who presents it, you as the facilitator sometimes need to say, are there any possible negative consequences of choosing that point of view? What other options should we consider? And as long as you're surfacing up some options and then asking people to contribute what they think, and even calling on the quieter folks and say, we haven't heard from you. What do you think about this? You'll find that the decisions will probably be of both higher value and also greater buy-in and acceptance, because people feel that they've been heard, that they've had a chance to discuss the process by choosing the best decision. I once had the assignment of leading a small group in our church to find a new youth pastor. And boy, if you want to hear opinions, you just go get in a church group that's trying to find a new minister. Anyway, I knew that this was potentially fraught at the end because everyone will have their favorites and they'll have strong opinions on why they like who they like, and they'll think everybody else is ridiculous. So I said, why don't we, before we start looking at the candidates, what are the criteria? What are the criteria? So I had them agree on the criteria. What's the weighting on the criteria? What makes sense? And I said, now let's take our 6 candidates and put them through the criteria. And what it did is that even people who had a favorite found out that that person didn't score well in the criteria, but because they had agreed on the criteria, they went along with the group, less ill feelings. So can always ask, and by the way, you're thinking, oh man, I can't hold like a 3-day conference on some of these things. I totally understand. You can do it in 5 seconds or 5 minutes. You don't have to take a long time. Just ask questions. Hey, I haven't heard your opinion on this. What do you think? And it doesn't mean that the quieter opinion's better. It just means you want to hear the opinions before you go forward. Remember though, try to avoid your own editorial opinion causing the group to say, I guess this is a done deal. And Sue's made up her mind. I only say that because I see Sue in the top left corner. All right, let's move from there to reflecting on conflict, since we talked about conflict in relation to these personality styles. So this is an easy one. We'll ask a couple of polling questions in a moment. I just need you to picture a disagreement that you had with someone recently, an argument, a debate. It doesn't have to be as nasty one. It just means like some disagreement between you and someone else. And probably not just, are we going to have Wendy's or McDonald's, but something a little bit more substantial, something that you had a disagreement about, while you're watching Netflix or Prime Video tonight. Not that. All right. Now think about how you handled yourself in that debate and discussion, and how did the other person handle themselves? So there's you and how you did. How good did you do at staying calm and listening to their point of view and expressing yourself very constructively? And how well did they do at listening and basically listening and explaining themselves? So we're going to ask you to rate each of you separately here. So polling question number 1 asks, on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you behave during the conflict? Now, 5 is you did an awesome job at staying open-minded and calm and everything. And a 1 means you didn't do very well. You let yourself get a little emotional, maybe didn't handle it as well as you could. Remember, this is all anonymous, folks, so we can see the results there on screen. All right, you know what? Pretty good. Some honesty there that maybe I didn't do as good a job as I could have. Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's go to the next question. The next question is, how did the other person do? So how, in your opinion, how well did they do in behaving well? So again, 5 is they were awesome at explaining themselves and listening to me and staying even keel. All right. Okay. So we're seeing interesting results here. All right. So Suzanne, to the extent that we can in a moment, we're just going to kind of look back at the previous response set. So, all right, so that's what you guys think. And I know I've only got maybe half this group have voted, but there's how you did. And let's see how they did. Go to the next one. Yeah. All right. Well, obviously the problem is those other guys. Right. Now, let me ask, June, you're with me on this, right? I see you. You're nodding. So yes, the other guys. Now, this will always be true. If I brought those people in, I asked them the same 2 polling questions, guess what? They were awesome or slightly more awesome, and you were quite maybe poor. Remember, you guys are being nice. You're not saying they're a disaster, but the skewing is that I do a pretty good job of staying calm and expressing myself and listening to their point of view, and they don't really do as good a job. So this is a concept called demonizing the enemy, right? Demonizing the enemy, it's a battle-worn strategy of governments sending their folks into battle. You see some of it in what's going on in Ukraine as well. And if you listen to the Russians talk about it, etc. But basically, any group going into battle always has to make the other side look really terrible, right? Really, really terrible, because you're going to ask your guys to go and do some really terrible things to those other folks. So it's called demonizing the enemy. And there is this natural tendency to think that we're right and the other person's wrong. But in truth, it's a combination. So for example, we think that we're right and the other person's wrong. In reality, there's probably a little bit of goodness in both of our arguments, right? So assuming then that one of the causes of conflict is a misunderstanding, the antidote, not the anecdote, that would be a story, but the antidote is education. So the question is, who should get educated first? Ed Braun, are you able to unmute for a moment? From Saugeen Shores, beautiful Saugeen Shores. If you can unmute. If if you're in a discussion with somebody else and we agree that part of our problem is a misunderstanding, who should get educated first?
Well, ideally, I guess I should get educated first to
Why?
try and understand the other person's side.
And what will that allow you to do, Ed? You're doing well so far. I agree with you. So once you find out my position on something, then what might you do with your position?
Well, my position may change. Once I
You're
understand
right.
their position better, then I might see that maybe I was wrong, and maybe it brings us a little closer together earlier.
You got it. We'll release you from the spotlight. Amazing job. So inevitably in any conflict, there are definitely opposing views, but there's also a couple of strands where there's commonality. Now, not to make things more complicated, but I guess I'm going to now that I said that. Can I be completely honest? Okay, so here's the thing. You can have disagreements over methods, right? How to do something. You have one point of view, I have another. Those are relatively what I would call small skirmishes. And then if you go really deep down on conflicts, you can get to conflicts of values. Now, the problem when you get to conflicts on values, which is you just don't believe the same things I believe, it's almost like taking a grenade pin and throwing it in there. It's really hard. And I noticed that some people, it's almost a form of psychological warfare to make things about values when they really just are a disagreement over methods or goals. And if you have some people like that, emotional terrorists in your board or your club, you know that they tend to overinflate things. Well, you just don't care about Rotary like I care about it. Or, first of all, because those things are going to push some of your buttons. I'd rather you just kind of go in your mind. Don't say this out loud because it'll offend them. That's interesting. In other words, think to yourself, but don't necessarily tell them that you think it's interesting. Is you got to try to get it back up to a lighter conflict, because honestly, human beings around the world, this is what we know through Rotary, we mostly value the same things, actually. We value love and relationships and family, right? So to say that we just don't believe the same things as each other, questionable. So try to keep things at the methods and goals level of conflict, but also try to get educated. And exactly as you had said, it's like get educated first, because you can look for areas of agreement, you can make connections to your point of view, or you can just regroup because maybe you didn't think that person was as dug in as they are. Okay, so we're going to do a breakout. I know we're at 8:34 on the clock, Eastern time, for those of you joining us from Australia. I'm just kidding. I don't think we have any Australians. Good morning. Good morning, mate. Okay, so conflicts and leadership style. So we're going to do a breakout. Now, we did want to wonder, Sonia, do you want to have your own group, not just with yourself, but we could put some people in, or do you want to be a floater?
I'll be a floater, thanks.
All right. So we're going to put you in a group. This time we're going to give you about 9 minutes. We're going to shave a minute. In the 9 minutes, I just want you to talk. Now, remember, try not to dominate the discussion. Just share something and then let other people speak. And if you're the facilitator, we just want you to be thinking about, when you think about leadership styles, when you think about sort of these potential conflicts, what might you learn from it? What could you possibly do with it? So any kind of insights you just got from the discussion, things that have been bouncing around in your mind from this conversation we've been having tonight, just share those in the 9 minutes that you have. And again, some people might not have a lot to contribute in this, which is fine, but use the time just to kind of talk through, what kind of board dynamics do you have? Some of you might be like, hey, my board's amazing. I don't think there's going to be any issues. Others of you probably have well-defined people in your mind that are challenging. So without naming names, just talk about, the person I thought of was this person, but now I realize they're just really detail oriented. And what that means is that I've got to give them time to think things over and make sure that we do a little bit of analysis before we jump in. So whatever insights you have, you can share it in the 9 minutes, and we'll see you back here after that. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you got something. We just have someone in the waiting room there. Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. Again, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you got even if you didn't get a chance to air too much of your own situation, I hope that just by hearing your peers talk about some things that might just spur some thoughts, or maybe you're just thankful you don't have some of those issues and problems to deal with. Remember that, again, our job is to try to make people feel good about their interactions, not only with us. And this is, you know, as a director type personality, I can tell you that I don't always think about that. I think everybody would be happy if we just achieve this goal, but not if I ram it down their throats. I know that. So first of all, are there any questions that you want to ask before I cover kind of what I think will be our final sort of content piece? If you do, you can raise your hand or you can unmute. Not hearing it. All right. Again, feel free if you want to. You can also type it in the chat. So, you know, there's obviously some content in there around planning and goal setting, which is important. I actually, though, I want to talk about board meeting tips as my last content piece, because there's again, the workbook has some really cool sort of suggestions and to-do items around the positive relationships and the planning and the goal setting. Actually, you know what? I do want to talk just a little bit, even though many of you had this as a strength, and I know Sonia put these great bullet items in there. It's, again, to the extent that you're a director type personality, some of you are, listening is one of the hardest things. In fact, my wife says, you teach listening skills, don't you? Right? What should I say? You know, honey, that's sarcasm. You should really dial that back. But really all listening is to fully hear someone, and then to be able to, I mean, ideally is to regurgitate back to them what you think is the key point that they're making. Many people just want to be heard and acknowledged, and not necessarily have you totally agree and buy in. But before you debate, because you're always going to be thinking about how you're going to speak to whatever they've just said, is just that idea of a quick recap, right? Depending on your beliefs, you know, human beings are only important to someone they have a relationship with. If you don't have a relationship, those other people are just them, right? It's only when you have a relationship with someone do they actually care about you and know that you care about them. And the only way we really have is to give our time and attention, which is really tough as a president, or even just as a human being who's busy in life. But if you can find a way to give people, I remember dealing with a hospital CEO, and he just had this magical way of making you feel really amazing, even though it was very, not orchestrated, but very timely and efficient. And I think if we can exude warmth without consuming all of our time and energy, we could do well. Now, empathy is the last one on that list. And I just want to speak to empathy because we've been teaching emotional intelligence to supervisors and managers, and struggle with empathy because we often confuse it with sympathy. Empathy kind of ties into that idea of psychological safety in that Project Aristotle. Empathy is your ability to see someone else's emotion and try to put words on it. Now, by the way, it's very hard to put words on emotions. I mean, if I ask you, why do you love who you love? You know, you might have a couple of awkward comments, but what you have is an emotion, and it's tough to describe why it is as deep as it is, right? So, and the English language actually has way more words for negative emotions than it does positive emotions. So everything that you can do is around acknowledging, understanding, spending some time. And when somebody seems to be a bit off, just say, hey, you don't seem to be yourself today. Is everything all right? Are you doing okay? As you know, in your life, if it's anything like my extended family and even my immediate family, there's always undercurrents of issues and things that people are dealing with. And you're only seeing one fraction of them at a club meeting or at a director's meeting. And if we could truly, really understand who people are under the surface, we would probably kind of find them a little less frustrating. I found that even the most abrasive people I know, when you get down to the inside, they're very soft. And they're emotional. Even the people who are crusty are emotional. They've just learned to defend themselves by attacking and criticizing others. And it's too bad, right? But that's how it is. So if we can simply acknowledge people, I do have a tip for the abrasive folks that you might interact with. Number one is when people are abrasive, they tend to be what we would call aggressively defensive. We call them aggressively defensive, which might seem odd to you that I would say that they're defensive, but they're defensive by attacking and criticizing others. If you have any very strong personalities who are aggressively defensive, just know that there's only two things that an aggressive defensive person respects. One is directness, and the other is data and evidence. So they don't really respond. If you try with an abrasive person to take a very soft approach, they'll just munch that up and it'll feed their fury. But if you listen to them and then you're very direct, like unfortunately, when you speak like that, other people don't want to buy into the ideas or they feel bad. And and if you have data and evidence, which you don't always have in a board situation, you can at least present that. Now, here's the other thing about an abrasive person. The only way you know you won, because they won't usually tell you I was wrong and you were right. The only thing you can get out of an abrasive person is that they get quiet and they withdraw. I want you to take that as a win. And the reason for that is you have to give an abrasive person an escape route. If you give them an escape route so they can change their mind, either because of something that you said or something that you showed them, then they don't want to tell you that you were right and they were wrong, and they don't want to admit failure. So don't press it to the port of interrogation where you try to get them to admit that they were wrong. Just allow them the space to change their mind by sharing with them some additional information that they might not have thought of. Now, last thing I want to do is talk about board tips. And, I've run some public meetings. I've definitely been on my share of boards, and I haven't always done these things, but some of these are, I think, quite helpful. And so I'm going to share them with you, and then we're going to obviously come to the close of our session. Now, by the way, I know a lot of boards, including the ones that I used to chair in Rotary, they have a certain structure to them. But here's my tip. Once you get past the, agenda approval and the minutes, if you still do that, I just want you to avoid this one trap. Do not start the meeting with the trivial items that are tiny and just meant to be announcements. It's the biggest pitfall you get is I just want to deal with a few items quickly to start our meeting. No. Because what people will do is they will spend an inordinate amount of time on those items that you really didn't intend to have minutes and minutes of discussion on. Instead, put the juiciest item at the top of your agenda and allow it to consume the proper amount of time that it needs. Save the trivial announcement items that you really don't want to debate and discuss and put them at the end of your agenda when everyone's looking at their watch to see when the meeting's over. And then they will naturally prevent themselves from over discussing what might be minor items. And the other thing you can do when you're dealing with the meeting, and we'll just put this full screen for a moment. So put your least important items at the end of your agenda, most important items at the top of the agenda. If you're into discussion, which of course most of the time you are, try to suggest, you can just suggest it as a norm, as a process, alternate between comments for or against a position, as opposed to just listening to 4 people say why it's an amazing idea or 4 people to criticize it. If more chair people would ask for statements for and statements against, and then alternate as needed until it's done. And also just say that it sounds like we've had a pretty thorough, does anyone have a different point of view than we've heard so far? And if not, then I would suggest that we go ahead and call this to a vote, right? So remember that you can still make people feel, that it's efficient, because a lot of people hate wasting time, especially if they are director personalities. But you can just do that. Now, Hala, go ahead and I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hi, Greg. At the break room, we had a question. How long should a debatable point take time? Like, how long should we give it? Like,
yeah, how long do you give it? Well, of course, the answer, and this sounds like a politician answer, but it depends, right? I would suggest that the amount of discussion should be related to the risk, importance, significance of the particular item. I mean, if you're making a long-term plan that, is a $50,000 project, you might want to take more than 5 minutes. But the good point is that you could actually say, I've allocated, 5 minutes, 8 minutes to this topic. And then by all means, if you have a smartphone, start your timer. Now, at the end of 8 minutes, you might say, okay, we've exhausted our 8 minutes, or we've got only a couple minutes left in discussion for this. I just wonder, is there another alternate point of view that we haven't heard, right? And I think then you could probably make your discussions a little bit more, but I do waffle on this because some issues need a full 20 minutes of discussion, and some issues really just need 5 or 7 minutes. And don't be afraid to pick a number other than 5, 10, or 15 minutes. Like let's give this thing 8 minutes or 9 minutes and run a timer. I think you'll find that people are very impressed, because if they've agreed that that's a good process to manage the discussion, then when it offends them, you can go, well, we just agreed to that. Thanks, Suzanne. She's pointing out that I've got 1 minute left. All right, thanks, Hala, for that. So alternate between arguments for and against. Now, the last one probably is a no-brainer for most of you, is to strive for consensus. And I had a colleague of mine who worked at a senior level in a major grocery chain. And he said what they were good at is, and they set this as a norm, within the meeting, let's by all means have a full and thorough and vigorous debate. In other words, let's be apart when we're together, and let's be together when we're apart. And I think consensus is not necessarily just majority vote. Consensus is that you had your chance to speak your mind. It didn't sway enough people to maybe have the same mind. And so when we go out, what we want to do is be united. And so that anyone who asks us a question, we can say, look, we had a very thorough debate, and this is the direction of the board. And I think if you can do that, and you might even want to talk about a few of these norms, which I'm sliding in as extra content, just so that you can get agreement. You know, what I'm going to suggest is that we'll use a timer. I know it feels a little bit, that I'm over managing it, but how do you feel about using a timer? And we'll set a certain amount of time for discussion, and then we can always revisit it if we need to. My friends, it's been a pure pleasure and an honor, actually, to be asked to work with you guys. As a former club president myself, I was in your shoes at a PETS. It's way easier to be a teacher at PETS than to be a participant, I would think. We were discussing in general, you can't possibly check every box on the Rotary to-do list. You can't. So I want you to focus mostly on what you think you can move the needle on, the 2 or 3 things that will give your club the biggest boost. And remember that chasing members just for the sake of members isn't important. What it's important is that members feel compelled to have a positive experience in your club and to feel a sense of accomplishment that they're making a difference. And if you can at all draw that connection, my friends, I think you're going to be successful. So thank you so much for your time. Again, if I can be of any service to you, please let me know. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sonia to wrap us up and promote next week's fabulous speaker.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Silent clapping, which I'm very appreciative of. Thank you.
We really appreciate your spending your evening with us, and your assistant as well, that we haven't seen, that's hiding in the background. Thank you to her too. Great. So next week, we are going to be hearing from David Elliott, who is going to talk to us about the foundation. And we're also going to be hearing from Ross Barnett and Roseanne Field, the dynamic duo from the Goderich Club, who will be talking to us about the Rotary Youth programs. So the Rotary Youth Exchange and also the New Generations Service Exchange. Keep on working through your President Basics course in the Learning Center. And in particular, I'd like you to make sure that you complete the last module, which is around protecting youth program participants, because youth protection and the youth protection policy is a huge part of our risk management program. And so Ross is also going to be discussing that as well. And I hope that you all have a great week. I will get the link out to Pella 3 to you tomorrow. And in the meanwhile, have a good week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good job, Greg. Thank you.
Fabulous job.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good night, all.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.